By the end of that winter, 3 of the wealthiest people in Boston would sign statements they never intended to sign, and one of them would do it with a hand that would not stop shaking. Nora Bennett was 33 years old, built the way most people apologize for out loud, and she had spent 11 years learning how to be the woman nobody bothered to look at twice. Damiano Vitale was the reason grown men checked the sidewalk behind them before they said his name. They met over a tape measure in a ruined hem, and the thing that welded them together was not a kiss and not a contract. It was a 5-year-old girl in mismatched socks who wandered into a room full of dangerous men, wrapped both arms around the worst one, and said, "Daddy, I can't find my cup." The shop went so quiet Nora could hear the radiator ticking behind the wall, and Damiano Vitale, who corrected everything, corrected nothing at all. It had been sleeting on Newbury Street for 6 days straight, the kind of Boston February that turned the brick into something the color of old bone. Ardenne and Vale sat between the shuttered gallery and a jeweler with a doorman, and its front windows glowed a warm and expensive gold that had nothing to do with the people who worked behind them. Nora came in through the alley door at 4 in the afternoon, the way the alterations staff always did, and hung her coat on the nail that had been hers since she was 26. The workroom smelled like steam and pressing cloth, and the faint scorch of 100,000 irons set down on damp wool. It was the only room in the city where she never felt too large. The tables were wide. The chairs had no arms. The ceiling was high enough that sound went up instead of pressing in. Down here, under the floor where the rich tried on their reflections, Nora Bennett was not a body. She was a pair of hands, and there were no better hands in Massachusetts. Lily was already asleep in the corner, curled on a folded bolt of camel hair with her boots still on. The sitter had canceled at 2:15, by text, with a period at the end and no apology. Nora had done the arithmetic she did every day now, $40 for a replacement she didn't have, or bring the kid and pray Gerald stayed upstairs. She brought the kid. She had brought the kid 4 times in 2 weeks, and every time she promised herself it was the last, and every time the math said otherwise. She unpinned a client's trousers and started letting out a seam that had been taken in wrong by somebody who didn't understand how a man walks. Her mother's cardiologist wanted $11,000 by the 15th of March. That was the first number. The second number was the one that never moved, no matter how many hours she took. $216,000 plus interest, inherited the way other people inherit a nose or a bad knee. That was her father's. Thomas Bennett had run a bonded warehouse on the Southie waterfront for 22 years. Small operation. 3 trucks, a forklift with a bent tine, a coffee maker he refused to replace. He was the kind of man who wrote everything down twice because he didn't trust his own memory. And it was that habit, in the end, that told Nora everything. 40 crates of counterfeit pharmaceuticals came through his floor in the autumn she turned 24. His signature was on the manifest, his seal, his ledger line, his handwriting on the intake sheet. He went in front of a judge who never once looked up, and he said the same 9 words the whole way down to his lawyer, to the paper, to Nora through a scratched plexiglass window. I signed for 40 crates of medical gauze. Nobody believed him. He died in the infirmary at Devon's 11 weeks into a 9-year sentence of a heart his own doctor had called strong. And the business went to the bank, and the debt came to his daughter, and the name on the shipping consortium that had brokered those crates dissolved the following spring into a holding company, and that holding company had one signature on its incorporation papers. C. Bruno. Nora kept her father's box under her side of the bed. 12 pounds of paper. She had read it so many times she could recite the intake sheet, the way other women recited lullabies. Overhead, the floorboards took Gerald Thorne's weight and passed it along. He came down at 5 with his sleeves rolled to show a watch he could not possibly afford. And he stood in the doorway of the workroom, the way men stand when they want a room to notice them, and it won't. You're on the Ashford fitting. Nora didn't look up. Marguerite does the Ashford fitting. Marguerite is in Providence with a herniated disc. And I've cut your Thursdays. By the way, we're rebalancing. He said rebalancing, the way another man might say good morning. And Bennett, front of house tonight. There's a private after close, so do something about His hand made a small circular motion in the air, describing her whole body generously, as though he were doing her the favor of not naming it. You know. I know, Nora said. Good. She waited until his shoes hit the fourth stair before she let out the breath. Grace Molina came in from the pressing alcove with 2 coffees and 1 eyebrow already raised. Grace was 61, 4'11", and had worked at Ardenne and Vale since it was called something else. She had also, in 30 years, never once used the phrase hide the waist. He cut your Thursdays, Grace said. He rebalanced them. Grace set the coffee down where Nora's elbow would find it. That man couldn't sew a button on a coat if his life was on the line, and he's rebalancing you. She glanced at the corner, at the small heap of sleeping child. She got the cough still. It's better. You look like something that's been rained on for a year. I've been rained on for 6 days, Grace. Let's not exaggerate. Camilla Ashford arrived at 6:40 in a coat the color of poured cream, with 2 friends and a phone held at the exact angle women hold them when they are recording without saying they are recording. The Ashfords had money that had been in Boston long enough to develop opinions. Camilla was the 4th generation of it, and she had the particular hardness of someone who had never once had to be interesting to be included. She was here for a fitting on the gown she'd wear to the Fenway Conservancy benefit, the whole reason the shop's 2nd floor had smelled like tulle for a month. Nora came up with the pins in her wrist cuff and her tape around her neck. "Oh," Camilla said, and let the syllable sit there and grow. "You're doing it. Marguerite's out. I'm sorry for the change." "No, it's fine. You're very sturdy, aren't you? That's probably good for kneeling." One of the friends laughed the way people laugh when they've agreed in advance to laugh. Camilla stepped up onto the block and lifted her arms. "Just be careful with your hands. They're a bit, you know how it is. Warm hands leave marks on silk." "They don't," Nora said, and started measuring. She worked the way she always did, fast and correct, and she did not permit herself a single tremor, because the tremor was the whole point of what Camilla was doing, and Nora had decided a long time ago not to pay that particular tax. The dress needed 3/8 of an inch let out at the left rib. Nora noted it silently, because Camilla Ashford was the kind of woman who would rather split a seam on a staircase in front of 400 people than be told her body had changed. "You have to hold this here," Nora said, and guided Camilla's hand to the tape. Camilla let it drop. It fell off the block and puddled on the floor near Nora's knee. Whoops! Nora knelt. The floor of Ardenne and Vale was 110-year-old oak, and Nora's knees had been carrying her whole life around on it for 11 years, and they made a sound going down that everyone in the room heard. Somebody's phone shifted angle. "Careful, sweetheart," Camilla said sweetly to the top of Nora's head. "I don't think the floor's rated." The friends laughed. Gerald Thorne, standing by the register with a client's card in his hand, laughed too. One small huff through the nose. The coward's version. The kind you can deny later. Nora picked up the tape. She stood. She finished the measurement. She wrote the number on the card in handwriting that did not waver, and she said, "Thursday at 4, it'll be ready." And she went back down the stairs and did not slam the door, because the door had a bell on it, and she was not going to give any of them the bell. She stood in the workroom with both hands flat on the cutting table. Grace didn't say anything. Grace just came over and stood beside her, shoulder to shoulder, and looked at the same patch of table until Nora's breathing came back down. "There's a private tonight," Grace said finally. 9 o'clock. Shop closes for it. Who closes a shop on Newbury for one fitting? Somebody who paid to have the shop closed. Grace shrugged one small shoulder. Marguerite was supposed to do it. Now it's you. And Gerald's going to stand there sweating through a $2,000 shirt, so at least there's that. Who is he? Grace was quiet for a second too long. "Vitale," she said. Nora had grown up in the city. You didn't need to know a thing about the North End to know that name. You knew it the way you knew which stretch of the river went thin in March. Not from experience, just from the fact that everyone around you had been careful about it for as long as you'd been alive. The suits in the back vault, Nora said slowly. The ones nobody's allowed to touch. The black canvas bags. 6 of them, Grace said. They've been here since October, every one of them cut by hand. And in 30 years, honey, I have never seen a man's measurements not change by so much as a quarter inch in 4 years. She picked up her coffee and looked at the ceiling. Not once. Except his. At 8:50, Gerald came down and told Nora to put her hair up and stay quiet unless spoken to. At 8:55, he turned off the front window display so the shop went dim from the street. At 9, a car stopped outside that did not look expensive, which was the first thing about Damiano Vitale that Nora ever noticed. And the second was that the sleet seemed to lose interest in falling for the 11 seconds it took him to cross the sidewalk. He was not a large man. That surprised her. 6 feet, maybe a half-inch under, and lean in the way of somebody who had been built by work and then maintained by discipline. And he moved through the door without hurry and without noise, and the bell above it did not ring because the man who came in ahead of him had caught it in his palm. That one was enormous. Shoulders that had to angle for the door frame, a broken and reset nose, hands like bricks in gloves. Enzo Marchetti took the room in a single, unhurried sweep. Exits, staircase, the alley door, Grace, Nora, the placement of every mirror, and then stepped aside and became furniture. Damiano Vitale had dark hair going early silver at the left temple only, and a mouth that rested in no particular expression, and eyes that did not travel the way Enzo's did. They went to one place at a time, completely, and then to the next. The strange thing, the thing Nora thought about for weeks afterward, was that nobody had told the shop to go silent. Gerald hadn't shushed anyone. There was no announcement. The noise simply stopped, the way birds stop on a street a half-minute before the weather turns, and everything on Newbury outside the glass kept moving, and everything inside it had agreed, without discussion, to wait. Mr. Vitale. Gerald's voice came out a full tone, higher than it had been on the stairs. It's an honor. We've prepared the private salon, and I want to say personally, on behalf of, who's doing the fitting? 4 words. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't look at Gerald when he said it either. He was looking at the vault door at the back of the shop. Our senior alteration specialist is unfortunately. Gerald's hand came up and did the circular motion again aimed at Nora. And Nora watched him do it and understood that he had never once thought of it as a gesture he was making. It was simply how he pointed at her. This is Bennett. She's very capable. She's been with us for... Damiano Vitale turned his head and looked at Nora. She had spent a decade being scanned. She knew all of it. The flick down and away. The frozen smile. The particular kindness that is really just relief at not being you. She had built a whole architecture for absorbing it without letting any of it in. None of that happened. He looked at her hands. You're a cutter, he said, not a fitter. Nora heard Gerald start to answer and heard him decide, halfway through the first syllable, that he had not been spoken to. I do both, she said. I'm better at the first one. Who taught you? A woman named Marguerite Sauve. And before that, my father, badly, on a machine that skipped every 11th stitch. Something happened at the corner of his mouth. It was not a smile. It was adjacent to one. Bring the 4th bag, he said to Enzo, and to Nora, upstairs. The private salon on the 2nd floor had a triple mirror, a low velvet bench, and a window with the shade drawn. Enzo set the black canvas bag down, unzipped it, and left without being asked. Inside was a charcoal 3-piece in a wool so dense it drank the light. Nora put a hand into the cloth before she thought about whether she was allowed to. Napoli, she said. Milan. No. She turned the sleeve, found the seam, ran a thumbnail up the inside of it. Cut in Milan. Closed in Naples. Whoever finished that armhole learned it from somebody's grandfather. She looked up, found him watching her, remembered who she was talking to, and set the sleeve down. It's a beautiful coat. It doesn't fit. It fits perfectly. It fits the man you were when it was made. He took his jacket off and handed it to her and stood in the shirt, and Nora put the tape around him and had her answer in 9 seconds. Somebody had shot him. High on the left side of the back, below the shoulder blade. She could feel the way the muscle had rebuilt around the lost denser on that side. The shoulder riding a 1/4 inch forward now to guard a thing that had healed 4 or 5 years ago and had never once stopped being defended. She did not say a word about it. She wrote 3 numbers on the card, moved the tape, and wrote a 4th. "You're quiet," he said. "You're paying for a fitting, not a conversation. Most people fill the silence anyway. Most people aren't holding pins." The corner of his mouth again. "The left shoulder," he said. "I'll rebuild the whole left side. Nothing on the outside will change. You'll stop noticing the collar at the end of a long night." She marked the chalk. "And I'll drop the button stance a 1/2 inch because you carry something at the front of your right hip, and the current stance argues with it every time you sit down." The room got very still. Behind her, in the doorway, she felt rather than heard Enzo Marchetti stop moving. Damiano Vitale looked at her in the triple mirror, and all 3 of him at once, and said in a voice with absolutely nothing in it, "Say that again." "I said I'd drop the button stance a 1/2 inch, because when a garment fights a man every day, the man always loses, and it always shows up in the shoulders." She met his eyes in the glass and did not blink. "I don't need to know what it is. I only need to know it's there." Neither of them spoke for a while, and that was when the salon door swung open, and a small person in a nightgown and 1 boot came in trailing a blanket, walked directly past 2 of the most dangerous men in New England, and wrapped both arms around Damiano Vitale's leg. "Daddy," Lily said with her eyes still mostly closed. "Daddy, I can't find my cup." The radiator ticked in the wall. Nora went cold from the scalp down. She was moving before she decided to move. "Lily, baby, no, come here, sweetheart. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. She's asleep, she doesn't." "Don't." He said it very quietly. Nora stopped with her hands out. He was looking down. The child had her face pressed to the outside of his knee and her fingers wound into the wool of his trousers, and she was unmistakably still asleep on her feet. The way 5-year-olds are when they get up and travel. Nobody in that room drew a breath. Damiano Vitale reached down and put his hand on the back of Lily's head. It was, Nora thought a long time afterward, the first careful thing she had ever watched a hand like that do. "What color is the cup?" he said. "Pink," Lily mumbled. "It's the pink one. Enzo. Boss. Boss. The pink cup is downstairs. Find it." And Enzo Marchetti, who had put men into the harbor, said, "Yeah," and went to find a sippy cup. And that was the moment Nora Bennett understood she was in considerably more danger than she had thought, and that not all of it was the kind she had been afraid of. Gerald arrived 30 seconds later at a run and made the worst decision of his professional life. "I am so sorry, Bennett. Get it out, Mr. Vitale. I want to be absolutely clear that we do not permit staff to bring." His voice climbed and cracked and got mean where it cracked, the way small men's voices do, their personal situations into this building. "She's finished here. Effective immediately. She is out on the street tonight, Thorne. And frankly, this is exactly the kind of thing I have been documenting with her. The appearance issues, the Thorne." Gerald stopped. Damiano had not moved. His hand was still on the child's head. "Say the name of the shop. Ardenne and Vale. Sir. Say it again in 6 weeks." He looked up, and Nora watched Gerald Thorne's face do something she had never seen a face do. "You won't be able to." Gerald opened his mouth. Nothing came out of it. "Go downstairs. Don't speak to her. Don't speak to the woman with the gray hair. Don't speak." He went. Lily's grip had gone slack. Nora crouched. The old floorboards took her weight and complained about it, and she did not care, not this time, and gathered her daughter up and stood. And Lily's head went into the crook of her neck the way it had every night for 5 years. She has a father, Nora said. Her voice came out wrong. She's never met him. She's 5. She sees other kids' fathers at the door of the school, and she's been trying the word out on strangers since November. She'll say it to a mailman. Where is he? Palm Beach, last I heard. He's engaged. His name. Why? Because I asked, said Damiano Vitale, and there was nothing threatening in it at all, and it was the most frightening question Nora had ever been asked. She held her daughter and did not answer it. He accepted that. He put his jacket back on. The fitting's finished. Get your coat. I have 4 hours of work left. No, you don't. They stood in the alley under a fire escape that dripped, and he told her, without dressing any of it up, exactly what she owed and to whom. $216,000, Damiano said, serviced by an outfit in Quincy called Harbor Line Recovery. Harbor Line is owned by a trust. The trust files out of a mailbox in Revere and is administered by a man who has never administered anything in his life. Sleet came down between them and neither of them moved. Cesare Bruno has been collecting your father's debt for 9 years. He collects it $140 at a time from you, and he does it because it entertains him. Nora couldn't feel her hands. How do you know that? Because I have been trying to take that trust apart for 4 years, and every time I get close to it, it moves. Your name is inside it. Your father's warehouse is inside it. He looked at her. I didn't come here for a suit, Ms. Bennett. Marguerite Sabe did my fittings for 11 years, and I have known for 2 of them that Thomas Bennett's daughter works in her basement. The alley was very cold. Then say what you want, Nora said. I want the paper on that debt. To get it, I need somebody Bruno's people will stand close to. You've had your hands inside their coats for a decade, and not one of them ever bothered to learn your face. He said it plainly, without apology, and she respected it more than she wanted to. In exchange, the $11,000 for your mother's cardiologist is gone by Monday. The $216 is gone the day I hold the note. Your mother comes out of that 3rd-floor walk-up in Malden and into a house with a bedroom on the ground floor. Your daughter goes to a school with a locked door and the man in the lot who works for me. And what do I lose? Every ordinary thing, he said. Permanently. People will learn your face. Some of them will come looking for it. If you say yes to this, you will never again be a woman nobody notices, and that will keep you alive on some nights, and it will very nearly kill you on others. Nora Bennett stood in an alley off Newbury Street with her daughter asleep against her shoulder, and 11 years of being invisible sitting on her back like wet wool. She thought about a manifest for 40 crates of medical gauze. You said he collects it because it entertains him, she said. Yes. Then I don't want the debt erased quietly. She looked up at him through the sleet. I want to be standing in the room when it goes. I want him looking at me when he understands whose daughter did it. If I can't have that, keep your money. Enzo Marchetti made a low sound in his chest that Nora would only understand months later, when she learned it was the nearest thing he had to applause. Damiano Vitale considered her for a long moment. Get in the car, he said. The house was in Brookline, on a street with old maples and no through traffic, and it had a 1st-floor bedroom with a window that faced east. Margaret Bennett was moved into it on a Sunday. She stood in the doorway of that room with her oxygen line looped over her arm and looked at the light coming across the floorboards and said, Your father would have hated this. And then after a minute, he'd have hated it, and then he'd have sat right down in that chair and never got up. She sat down in the chair. She looked at her granddaughter running a lap of the empty living room, and then at her daughter, and her eyes were sharper than her lungs. Nora, what did you sell? Nothing. That's not an answer. That's a shape. Mom. I buried a man over a piece of paper, Margaret said. I know what it costs to touch that world. He didn't sign anything, Nora said. That's the whole point. Neither did I. The dress fitting for the Fenway Conservancy benefit happened 11 days later in a suite at the Copley, and it was where Nora met Fabienne Cross. Fabienne was the stylist Damiano's people use for public events. and he arrived with 2 assistants, a garment rack, and the expression of a man being asked to solve an unsolvable geometry problem. "So," he said, walking a slow circle around her. "So, okay. We have options. We have options. Here's my thinking." He pulled a black column dress off the rack, floor-length, high-necked, cut with the deliberate vagueness of a curtain. Long line. Vertical. Something to quiet the waist blurred the hip. Take the eye up, up, up. Nobody's looking at you. You understand you're not the story tonight, so we take you out of the conversation, and that is a gift. That is genuinely a mercy. Take it back." Damiano was in the doorway with his coat still on. Fabian turned, delighted. "Mr. Vitale, I was just explaining the strategy for take the black one back to your van. Take the gray one. Take the other gray one." He came into the room without raising his voice at all, and Fabian Cross's face began to change 1 degree at a time. "You've dressed 9 of my people in 4 years, and every one of them walked into a room looking like they were hoping to be forgiven for something. She isn't asking anybody for anything. Don't put her in an apology. That's with respect, sir. That's not how the Marchetti will help you carry the rack." He was gone in 90 seconds. Nora stood in the middle of a hotel suite with pins in her cuff, and something enormous and unfamiliar moving behind her ribs. "I could have handled him," she said. "I know." "Then why?" Damiano set his coat over the back of a chair. "Because you've been handling men like that since you were 22, and you're going to spend the next month handling worse ones, and I'd rather you spent the strength on Cesare Bruno." He looked at the empty rack. Also because he was wrong. "What do you want to wear?" She thought about it, and then she said the true thing instead of the safe thing. "Green," she said. "Deep green, something with weight to it. Something with a structure that holds a line all the way down and doesn't drape over me apologizing." Her jaw set. "I've been sewing armor for men for 11 years. I know exactly how to build it. Nobody ever asked me to build one for myself." "Then build it," said Damiano Vitale. "Charge me for it." She cut it herself, out of a silk veil the color of a spruce wood in low light, over 4 nights in the workroom of the shop that Damiano now quietly owned. Structured shoulder, a waist seam that did not pretend, a back that fell straight and heavy, like something a queen would wear to a war. She built it the way she'd have built a coat for a man who needed to be able to move in it, because that was, in the end, the same skill. Grace Molina stayed late and stitched the hem beside her, and said nothing about any of it except, at 2 in the morning, "He fired Gerald on Tuesday, you know. Whole floor. Turns out the man's been skimming out of the alterations tips for 9 years." She bit a thread. 9 years, honey. Off you. Off me. Off the girls who don't have papers. Nora's hand stopped on the seam. "What happened to him?" "He's applying for jobs," Grace said with enormous satisfaction. "Nobody on Newbury will take his call. Nobody on Boylston either. Somebody let it be known." She looked up over her glasses. "You want to know the strangest part? Nobody had to threaten a soul. One man said one sentence at a dinner, and Gerald Thorne stopped existing." Nora thought about that for a long time. The nights in the Brookline house were the part she was least prepared for. He came by twice a week at first, and then more. He never stayed in the house. He sat in the front room with a glass he didn't drink and went through the trust filings with her page after page. And at some point in every one of those evenings, Lily would appear in the doorway in her pajamas with a book and stand there with the enormous patience of a 5-year-old who has decided something. The first 3 times, Nora sent her back to bed. The 4th time, Damiano said, "Leave it," and took the book and read a story about a bear who lost a mitten in a voice so level and unhurried that the child was asleep in 11 minutes. And Nora stood in the hall with a hand over her mouth and could not have explained why to save her life. He never let Lily call him Daddy again. He corrected her every single time, gently, the same 4 words, "My name is Damiano." And Lily, who could not pronounce it, called him Dami, and he let that stand. Nora asked him about it once, on the porch in the cold. "You could have let her," she said. "She'd have forgotten by summer. No, she wouldn't. He watched the street. I was 6 when my mother started letting a man come to the house who wasn't my father. Nobody corrected me either. He was gone in a year, and I spent 4 more waiting at the window. A muscle moved in his jaw. The word is hers. She doesn't get to spend it on somebody who hasn't earned it. When I've earned it, she can say it, and I'll answer. Nora looked at his profile in the porch light and understood that she was in serious trouble. He told her about the shoulder on a night in March without her asking. His younger brother Matteo, 4 years dead. A restaurant on Salem Street. 2 men who had been paid by somebody neither of them could ever prove. He said it in the flat, sanded-down voice of a man who had told himself the story so many times it had stopped having edges, and then at the very end his hand shook once around the glass, and he set it down. "You've been hunting the same trust for 4 years," Nora said slowly. "Yes. It isn't only my father, is it?" "No," said Damiano Vitale. "It isn't only your father." And she reached over and put her hand over his, which was a thing nobody had done to him in a very long time. And neither of them moved for about a minute and a half, and neither of them said one word about it afterward. The first strike came out of a coat. It was 3 days before the Conservancy benefit, and Nora was going through the guest list. Damiano's people had assembled, and she stopped on a name 11 lines down. Marco Delfino. Delfino Freight and Bonded Storage. Table 9. "I know him," she said. Enzo looked up. "You know Delfino. I know his coat." She was already standing. 2 winters ago. Camel overcoat. Loro Piana. 44 long. And he came in and he didn't want it. Let out even though he needed it. Let out. And he asked for something else instead. She pressed her fingers to her mouth. "He asked me to put in a hidden pocket. Interior left. Sewn into the lining, under the arm, with a flap that closes on a magnet instead of a button, because he said he was tired of things falling out of his jacket in the car." Damiano had gone very still. "That is not a request tailors get," Nora said. "I have gotten it exactly twice in 11 years. I remember every stitch of it. I remember it because I invented the flap for him. The standard one sits too low and it catches on a seatbelt. So I moved it up 1.5 inches, and I have never told another living soul how I did it." "You can find it in the dark," Damiano said. "I could find it wearing oven mitts." Salvatore Conti spoke for the first time from the end of the table. He was 79 and had been consigliere to 3 men, and he had said almost nothing to Nora in 2 months except, "Good evening." "Delfino carries the collection schedule," Salvatore said. "Physically, on paper, he is the only one of Bruno's people who does not use a phone for it, and he has not used a phone for it since 2019, and until this moment I could not tell you where on his body it goes." He looked at Nora over his glasses for a long moment. "Damiano, she just handed you 4 years. The benefit was held under the great glass ceiling of a hall on Huntington Avenue, and Nora Bennett walked in on Damiano Vitale's arm in dark green veil and did not lower her eyes at a single person. Camilla Ashford saw her from across the room and dropped a full glass of champagne. It was a small thing and an enormous one, and Nora would replay it for years. The way Camilla's mouth opened around a joke she had already loaded, and the way the joke died there, because he cannot mock a woman for taking up space when she has walked into the room like the room was built for her and everyone else as a guest. "Nora," Camilla said finally, recovering. "You look, honestly, good for you." "Your left rib seam is a 1/2 inch tight," Nora said pleasantly. "You've been holding your breath since the coat check. Try not to laugh." She crossed the floor to table 9 and she found Marco Delfino, and she was very warm and very forgettable, and she talked to him about absolutely nothing for 4 minutes. And when the ballroom went dark for the option video, she put 2 fingers into the lining of a camel overcoat on a chair back and came out with 16 folded pages. Enzo photographed all of them in a service corridor in 90 seconds. The pages went back into the pocket. The magnet closed. Marco Delfino wore that coat home and slept well and did not know for another 19 days that anything on earth had changed. Preston Wilder came back on the 2nd Tuesday of April. He was waiting outside the school gate at 3:15 in a rented convertible with the top up and a jacket that did not fit him, and Nora recognized the back of his head from 140 yards away and felt 6 years drop out from under her like a stare that isn't there. "Nora," he said, getting out. "Nora. Hey. Wow." He had been the most handsome man she had ever been in a room with, once. He was 36 now, and it had begun to slide. And the slide was not the reason her stomach turned. "You look incredible," Preston said. "Seriously, you look, did you? What are you doing at my daughter's school? Our daughter. You have never used that word in your life." He laughed, easy, charming, exactly the way he had laughed at her in a rented apartment in Somerville the week after Lily was born, when he'd said the thing he said. She could still hear the sentence. "I just didn't sign up for what you've turned into." He had left $41 on the counter and a note about needing space. And he had never signed a single document, never sent a single check, never once asked what his child's voice sounded like. "Look, I've had some time to grow," he said. "I've done a lot of reflecting. And I saw a photograph, Nor. From that conservancy thing. You were on the arm of—" He lowered his voice boyishly, thrilled with himself. "Do you have any idea who that is?" "Yes," said Nora. "I do. So here's what I'm thinking. I'm her father. Legally, that's a real thing. That's a whole legal situation. And I don't want it to be complicated." "How much?" "Don't say it like that." "How much, Preston?" He named a number. Then, when her face did not move, he named a bigger one, which told her everything about how much of it was a plan and how much of it was appetite. Nora looked at him for a while. "She has a stuffed rabbit with one ear," she said. "She's allergic to omens. She sings in her sleep. She learned to read in November, and she reads street signs out loud from the back seat until somebody begs her to stop." Her voice did not rise once. "You have never known a single one of those things, and you are standing outside her gate at pickup because you saw a photograph. Nora, get off this sidewalk." He got off the sidewalk. He, also being Preston Wilder, made one phone call from the car, not to a lawyer because he did not have one, but to a woman he had met twice at a party in Palm Beach, who had been extremely interested to hear anything at all about the fat little tailor who had turned up on Damiano Vitale's arm. Camilla Ashford took that call. Camilla Ashford, who had spent 9 years being told by her own family that the Ashford Trust was restructured through the Bruno interests, darling, don't ask, made her own call an hour later. That is how Cesare Bruno learned that Nora Bennett's daughter got out of school at 3:15. The retaliation came 8 days later, and it came, as she had always been afraid it would, through the pharmacy. Margaret's cardiac medication was delivered every second Thursday by a courier service from a compounding pharmacy in Newton. Same window, 10 to 11. Nora had signed for it 22 times. At 10:40 on a Thursday morning, the buzzer went, and a young man in a delivery fleece stood at the gate with the right tablet, the right barcode, the right laminated badge, and the right 2-syllable greeting. And Nora Bennett looked at his jacket. The fleece was correct. The fleece was perfect. But underneath it, where he'd left it, half unzipped in the warmth of the morning, was a navy sport coat, and Nora had spent 11 years of her life looking at exactly one thing on a human being. And what she saw was a lapel roll that had been pressed flat instead of rolled, the mark of a shop that finishes with heat because it can't afford the time. And under the left arm, a lining seam that sat an inch and a half high with a fold in it that she recognized the way other women recognize their own handwriting. The magnet flap. Her own flap. Her own invention, the one she had put in exactly twice. Nora smiled at the man through the gate and said, "You're early, hang on. I have to get the fridge key." And she walked back into the house at a completely normal speed. And she picked up her daughter off the living room rug mid-sentence, and she carried her down into the basement and put her in the utility room behind the steel door that Enzo had installed in February. And she pressed the phone into Lily's hands. "Baby, look at me. This is the game. You count to 200, slow, and you don't open this for anybody except me or Dami. Not Grandma. Not a policeman. Not anybody. Are you? 200. Start now. She sealed the door. She called Enzo on the way back up the stairs and said 4 words. The Newton Pharmacy Courier. And she hung up before he answered. Because Enzo Marchetti was 14 minutes away, and she did not have 14 minutes. She had her mother upstairs, asleep in an east-facing room on oxygen. And she had the whole ground floor of a house she knew better than the man outside did. Kane came in through the kitchen door 40 seconds later, quietly, because the delivery fleece had never been anything but a way to get her to open a gate. Nora was not in the kitchen. Nora was in the front hall where she had already taken the runner off the floorboards and turned it upside down on the tile. And she had already opened the coat closet door all the way so it blocked the sightline to the stairs. And she was standing behind it with a 9-pound pair of tailor's shears in her right hand and her heart going like something trying to get out of a box. He went past her toward the staircase. He got 1 foot onto the rubber backing of an upended runner on wet tile in hard-soled shoes, and Nora Bennett put her entire body, all of it, every pound she had ever been made to apologize for, 240 pounds of a woman who had carried a child and a mother and a dead man's debt, up 3 flights of stairs for 9 years, into the back of that closet door. It was not elegant, it was physics. He went into the newel post and down, and the thing in his hand went across the floor and under the radiator, and Nora did not go for it, because she had already decided that she was never once in this life going to be the woman who reaches for the gun on the floor and loses. She stayed on the door. She braced her shoulder against it and pinned his arm between the edge and the frame and leaned, and she kept leaning while he swore at her, and while he tried to buck her off, and while he told her exactly what he was going to do to her daughter, and she leaned harder, and she thought about 40 crates of medical gauze, and she did not move 1 inch for 4 minutes and 10 seconds. Enzo Marchetti came through the front door at 10:52. What happened after that, Nora did not watch. She went downstairs and sat on the cold floor with her back against a steel utility door and said, "It's me, baby. It's Mom, you can open it. You were so brave, you were so brave." And she was still saying it when a hand came down on her shoulder, and it was not Enzo's. Damiano Vitale had driven from the North End in 11 minutes. He knelt on the basement floor in a $4,000 suit and put both hands on either side of her face, and for the first time in the 4 months she had known him, the man was not calm. His hands were shaking. His breathing was wrong. Something behind his eyes had come completely off its hinges, and he was holding it down with visible effort, the way you hold a door in a storm. "Are you hurt?" "No." "Is she hurt?" "No, she's fine." She counted. She got to 200 and started over. Nora's teeth had begun to chatter. Damiano, the courier. His jacket. It was the pocket. It was my pocket. The flap. It was I know. Enzo told me. His thumb moved along her cheekbone. "Nora, I'm okay. Nora, I'm okay. Nora, I'm okay." He kissed her. It was not a gentle thing, and it was not meant to be. It had the whole drive from Hanover Street in it, every red light, every second of not knowing. He had one hand in her hair, and one at the small of her back, and he pulled her in like a man closing a wound, and she took a fistful of his lapel, the lapel she had built with her own hands, the one that finally sat right on the left shoulder, and pulled him back just as hard. When they broke apart, he pressed his forehead to hers and said very low, in a voice that had gravel all the way through it, "Nobody touches this house again. Not a doorbell. Not a phone call. Nobody." Upstairs, Lily was asking Enzo whether the game was over. And later that night, when the house was quiet and Margaret had slept through the entire thing, Damiano stood at the front window looking out at the maples and said the sentence that changed the shape of everything. 4 people knew that delivery window, he said. You, your mother, me. He did not turn around. And the man who set the rotation on the men watching the street. Enzo? No. Damiano's reflection in the black glass had no expression at all. Enzo doesn't set rotations. Renzo does. Renzo Fontana had been underboss of the Vitale family for 9 years. He had carried Matteo Vitale's casket. He had a daughter at Regis and a mother in Revere, and a laugh you could hear through 2 rooms. And when Damiano said his name at the window, Nora's first reaction was that it was impossible, and her second reaction, arriving about 11 seconds later, was a slow, sick physical certainty. "Damiano," she said, "what does his coat look like?" He turned around. "His coat," she repeated. "Not his suits. The overcoat, the one he wears in the car." "Camel," said Damiano Vitale. "Loro Piana. 44 long." She had told him she had put that pocket in exactly twice in 11 years. She had never told him it was the same winter. They came into the shop on Newbury at 1 in the morning, and Nora went into the archive drawers, and it took her 19 minutes to find the card because Marguerite Sauvé filed by cloth and not by client, and Marguerite Sauvé had been dead for 11 days. January, 2 winters ago. Loro Piana Camel, 44L. Interior left, magnet flap, raised 1-5. 2nd of 2. Referred by M. Delfino. Client, R. Fontana. Salvatore Conti read that card 4 times without speaking. Then he took his glasses off and put them down on the cutting table and pressed the heels of both hands into his eyes. Delfino referred him, the old man said, in January 2 years ago. He looked up. "Damiano, that is 4 months before your brother. Nobody in that basement said anything for a while. I want him alive," Damiano said at last, and Nora heard exactly what was underneath it, and she stepped in front of him. "No," she said. "Not like that. Nora, listen to me." She put her hand flat on his chest. "You've had 4 years of wanting it that way, and it never once got you the trust, and it never got your brother back. And if you do it that way tonight, you will be a man on the news by Friday, and Cesare Bruno will still be having lunch on Atlantic Avenue on Saturday." Her voice stayed level. "My father spent 9 weeks telling a room full of people the truth, and nobody listened, because he had nothing in his hands. We have 16 pages. We have a card in my own handwriting. We have a courier in a basement in Chelsea who is very interested in living." Enzo Marchetti said quietly, "She's right, boss." "Take everything from them," Nora said. "In daylight, on paper, with their names on it, and put me in the room." The dismantling took 19 days, and it went in the order she chose. They started with Eleanor Prescott because Eleanor Prescott was the hinge. She chaired the board of Harborview Medical, and she sat on the Fenway Conservancy, and she had for 11 years run a charitable foundation that received large clean patient donations from a bonded storage company in Chelsea and paid them out again as grants to entities that had no employees. It was a beautiful machine. It had also, on page 9 of Marco Delfino's collection schedule, been sketched out in ballpoint by a man who did not trust computers. Nora sat across a conference table from Eleanor Prescott on a Tuesday morning with a lawyer on either side of her and slid a single photocopy across the wood. "You have until 5 o'clock, she said, "to resign from both boards and hand the foundation's records to the U.S. Attorney's Office voluntarily." "Voluntarily is better. Ask my father." Eleanor Prescott, who was 68 and had been the most powerful woman in Boston healthcare for 2 decades, looked at the photocopy and then at Nora Bennett and said, "Who are you?" "I altered your husband's dinner jacket in 2019, Nora said. "You waited in the car." She resigned at 4:40. The Ashford collapse took 9 days, and Nora did not have to lift a finger for any of it, which was, in the end, the sweetest part. When the foundation's filings went into the U.S. Attorney's Office, 3 generations of Ashford money turned out to have been sitting inside the same restructured trust, and the trust froze, and the Ashford name went from an asset to a liability in about the time it takes a season to change. Camilla came to the Brookline house in the rain in June. She stood at the gate and did not have anything prepared, which was the first honest thing Nora had ever seen her do. "They took the Chestnut Hill house," she said. "They took my mother's. They took everything they said the trust was. I didn't know, Nora. I swear to God I didn't know where any of it came from. Nobody ever tells you. They just." Her mascara was gone. Her hands were shaking. "You could say something. To him. One word from you and he would," Nora agreed. "Then say it. Nora looked at her for a long moment through the bars of a gate. "You called Cesare Bruno's people about my daughter's school," she said. Camilla Ashford's face did the thing that faces do. "I didn't. That wasn't. I only mentioned, go home, Camilla. I don't have one." "I know," said Nora, and went inside and closed the door and did not watch through the window because she had promised herself she wouldn't, and she kept it. Preston Wilder received a visit from 3 attorneys and one very large man on a Thursday in Palm Beach. He signed a full and permanent termination of parental rights in 11 minutes, and he cried while he did it, and everyone in the room understood that he was crying about the money. Renzo Fontana was taken at his mother's house in Revere on a Sunday after church without a shot fired, and what happened to Renzo Fontana afterward was the one part of the whole affair that Nora Bennett never asked a single question about then or later. And on the 22nd of June, in a bonded warehouse on the Chelsea waterfront that had once belonged to a man named Thomas Bennett, Nora stood in front of Cesare Bruno. He was 74 and small and beautifully dressed, and he had the pleasant, unhurried face of a man who had never in his life been asked to account for anything. His people were gone. His lawyer was in a car outside with the door locked. Federal indictments had been unsealed at 9 that morning in 3 districts, and the reason they had been unsealed at 9 that morning was sitting in a folder under Nora's arm. He looked at her without a flicker of recognition. "I'm sorry," Cesare Bruno said politely. "Have we met?" And Nora Bennett smiled, because that, precisely that, was the whole architecture of her life, the exact shape of every room she had ever been in, and here it was, one last time, offered up like a gift. "No," she said. "You've never met me. You've been taking $140 a month out of my pay for 9 years, and you have never once known my name." She opened the folder. "Thomas Bennett," she said, and put down the intake sheet. 40 crates. He signed for medical gauze. "This is your consortium's amended manifest filed 11 days after his arrest. And this is the original which he wrote out twice because he didn't trust his own memory. And this is the notarized statement of the freight agent who watched your people swap the seals." She laid them down one at a time in a perfectly straight line, unhurried. "This is page 9 of Marco Delfino's collection schedule. This is Eleanor Prescott's foundation ledger. This is the wire instruction for the payment to 2 men on Salem Street in April 4 years ago, and this is the signature underneath it. And I'm going to need you to look at it, Mr. Bruno. Look at the whole thing. There's no rush. I've waited 9 years." Cesare Bruno looked down at the papers on the table. The warehouse was very quiet. Rain came down onto a tin roof that Thomas Bennett had patched himself in 2011. "My father was 58, Nora said. "He had a strong heart. Every doctor said so." Bruno's hands had begun to move, slightly, on the tabletop. "You should know that I built the case," she said. "Not him, me. I found Delfino's pocket because I sewed it. I found Fontana's because I sewed that one too. 9 years, you had my name in a servicing file, and you never bothered to find out what I did for a living." She closed the folder. "I'm a tailor, Mr. Bruno. I've had my hands inside your organization's coats for 11 years, and every single one of you let me, because you looked at me and decided there was nothing there worth checking." The federal agents came in at 11:20. She did not gloat, and she did not raise her voice, and she did not say another word to him. She simply stayed exactly where she was in the middle of her father's floor, with her chin up, until they walked Cesare Bruno past her, and at the door he turned his head and looked back. And then he knew her finally completely, and Nora Bennett let him take that look with him. They were married in September in a small church in the North End, with the doors open to the street. Margaret Bennett walked in on her own 2 feet, with the oxygen line tucked under a jacket her daughter had cut for her. Grace Molina cried from the second pew and pretended it was the incense. Enzo Marchetti wore a suit Nora had made him and stood at the end of the aisle looking like a wardrobe in mourning, and wept openly and dared anyone to mention it. Salvatore Conti, 79 years old, gave the blessing. He spoke for 4 minutes, mostly in Italian, and the one part he said in English was this: "This family has buried a brother and lost a friend, and it did not learn anything from either. Then a woman came down a staircase with pins in her sleeve and taught us in one winter what 40 years could not. Look at what she built. Look at how carefully she built it. He paused. And understand what she is capable of, if anyone here is ever foolish enough to test her. Nobody laughed. That was, more or less, the point. Nora wore green again, because the color belonged to her now. She had built the dress herself over 11 nights, and it fit exactly the woman she was, and she had not taken in 1 inch of anything to make anybody in that church more comfortable. Lily walked ahead of her down the aisle in a dress with pockets, because she had negotiated hard for the pockets. And when she reached the front, she did not go to her seat. She stopped in front of Damiano Vitale, and she put her hands behind her back, and she looked up at him, wide awake this time, deliberate. 5 years and 10 months old and absolutely certain, and the whole church heard her. "Is it okay now?" Lily said. "Can I say it now?" And Damiano Vitale, who had corrected her every single time for 7 months, went down on one knee in front of 400 people and said, "Yes." Then he said, "It's okay now." She said the word. He answered to it. And that is the story of a woman who spent 11 years being the last person anyone in the room bothered to look at, and who found out that she had been standing inside their pockets the entire time, holding all of it in her hands, waiting for somebody to hand her a reason. They mocked her body while she measured them. They mocked her patience while she counted their stitches. And when it came apart in the exact order she chose, because the woman nobody bothered to look at had been looking at all of them for a very long time. Underestimating her cost them everything, and not one of them saw the bill coming. If Nora's reckoning gave you chills, hit that like button and share this with somebody who loves a heroine who takes her own power instead of waiting to be handed it. Subscribe for a new dark romance every week, and tell me in the comments which one of them deserved it most.